Good day, everyone. I am Honeylee Ferolino, and I am your teacher for today. But before we start our discussion, let us first have an activity. I have here a maze map, maze A and maze B, and you have 10 seconds to answer it. Time's up. Now, let us check whether you got the correct answer. Did you get the correct answer? How did you solve maze A? What strategy did you use? Was it easier to solve maze B than A? Why? Usually, people who work in the maze activity, which you just did, would say that maze B is much easier. This is because they found the mazes were identical, except that the entrance and exit points were reversed. Their experience in maze A helped them to answer maze B a lot easier. People create mental maps of things they perceive. These mental maps help them respond to other things or tasks later, especially if they see a similarity. You may begin to respond with trial and error, which is behavioristic, but later on, your response would be internally driven, which is cognitive perspective. This is what we call neo-behaviorism. Neo-behaviorism. It has aspects of behaviorism, but it also reaches out to the cognitive perspective. There are two theories reflecting neo-behaviorism that stands out. These two theories are Edward Tolman's Purposive Behaviorism and Albert Bandura's Social Learning Theory. Both theories are influenced by behaviorism, which is focused on the external elements in learning. But their principles seem to also be reflective on cognitive perspective, which is focused on more internal elements. And now let's have Thomas Purposive Behaviorism. Purposive behaviorism has also been referred to as side learning theory and is often seen as the link between behaviorism and cognitive theory. Tolman's theory was founded on two psychological views, those of Gestalt psychologists and those of John Watson, the behaviorist. First, Tolman believed that learning is a cognitive process. Learning involves forming beliefs and obtaining knowledge about the environment and then revealing that knowledge through purposeful and goal-directed behavior. For example, a child learning how to ride a bike. Instead of only forming simple associations between pedaling and balancing, the child is also building a mental representation of how the bike moves, how balance is maintained, and the coordination required. This cognitive understanding allows the child to eventually ride the bike without constant trial and error or explicit instructions. Second, Tolman stated in his sign theory that an organism learns by pursuing signs to a goal. According to this theory, an organism doesn't simply form an association between a stimuli and responses, but instead learns to interpret signs in the environment and uses them to navigate towards a desired goal. For example, imagine a person trying to find their way through a city. They may use various signs, such as street names, landmarks, or a map to guide them to their destinations. In this case, the signs help the person to mentally construct a cognitive map of the city and utilize this information to reach their goal. The third one, we have Tolman's form of behaviorism stress the relationships between stimuli rather than a stimulus response. Tolman said that a new stimulus or the sign becomes associated with already meaningful stimulus or the significate through a series of pairings. For example, in your maze activity, the new stimulus or sign is maze B, which becomes associated with already meaningful stimuli, the significate, which is maze A. So you may have connected the two stimuli, maze A and maze B, and used your knowledge and experience in maze A to learn to respond in maze B. Moving on, we have Tolman's key concepts. First, we have learning is always purposive and goal directed. Tolman asserted that learning is always purposive and goal directed. He held the notion that an organism acted or responded for some adaptive purpose. He believed that individuals do more than merely respond to a stimuli. They act on beliefs, attitudes, changing conditions, and strive toward goals. Tolman saw that behavior is holistic, purposive, and cognitive. For example, a student may engage in learning with the goal of receiving a high grade on an exam or gaining admission to a prestigious university. Next, we have cognitive maps in rats. So, cognitive maps in rats is demonstrated through experiments in which rats are placed in a maze. One group of rats was placed at random starting locations in the maze, but the food was always in the same location. Another group of rats had the food placed in different locations, which required exactly the same patterns of turns from their starting locations. The group that had the food in the same location performed much better than the other group, supposedly demonstrating that they had learned the location rather than the specific sequence of turns. This is tendency to learn location signified that rats somehow form cognitive maps that help them perform well on the maze. He also found out that organisms will take the easiest or shortest route to achieve a goal. Next, we have latent learning. Latent learning is a kind of learning that remains or stays with the individuals until needed. For example, a 2-year-old always sees her dad operate the TV remote control and observe how the TV is turned on and how the channel is changed and volume adjusted. After some time, the parents are surprised on their first time to see their daughter holds the remote control. She already knows what buttons to press for what functions. Through latent learning, the child knows the skill beforehand, even though she has never done them before. Next, we have the concept of intervening variable. Intervening variables are variables that are not readily seen but serve as determinants of behavior. Tolman believed that learning is mediated or is influenced by perceptions, expectations, representations, needs, and other internal or environmental variables. For example, in his experiments with rats, he found out that hunger was an intervening variable. And lastly, we have reinforcement not essential for learning. Tolman concluded that reinforcement is not essential for learning, although it provides an incentive for performance. For example, a child may learn to be afraid of dogs after watching another child react fearfully to a dog, without the need for the child to experience reinforcement for this learning to occur. And that's all for my report. I hope you learned something. This is Honeylee Ferolino. Thank you for listening.